This episode is proudly supported by OpenTable.
Nearly 1/3 of diners are booking same day. So they're making those decisions on the spot. And 10% are making their bookings within just a few hours. And so it's why it's so important to have booking software like OpenTable, which allows your diners to discover you. And so when restaurants are on platforms like OpenTable, they're much more likely to be discovered. We help diners to connect to restaurants. Ultimately, having technology, using technology, helps you to reattach to those diners.
Experience the power of OpenTable. For an exclusive offer, visit restaurant.opentable.com.au/DITW.
My job is to make people feel loved when they come into the restaurant. And I would like to keep doing that because, I've got a garden there. I might as well keep using it. I've got a little shop here, so I could reinvent it as something, but that'd take a lot of effort, wouldn't it?
This is the Deep in the Weeds podcast. I'm Anthony Huckstep. Well, it's a very special day for a few reasons. Today's guest was our third ever guest on Deep in the Weeds 3 years ago. And as we celebrate 3 years of the Deep in the Weeds podcast network, National Treasure Annie Smithers is celebrating 10 years of Fermier. Annie, as always, I'm thrilled to catch up with you. How are you?
Hi, happy birthday.
Well, happy birthday to you. We're excited about 3 years, but a decade for a restaurant is pretty extraordinary.
It's been a wacky decade, but it's really funny. I can remember lying in bed, just over 3 years ago, listening to you, or just under 3 years ago, listening to you. And I think the first one I listened to was Jackie Challenor. And I was lying there and I was thinking, who's this bloke? What's he got to say? I need to talk to him. I want to talk to him. And I sent you a funny little message over Instagram. And I remember you called me back and I think it was a Sunday morning or something outrageous, and I was out in the vegetable garden.
I was walking the dog in Hague Park in Canberra.
And, the world had changed and I wasn't at work on a Sunday and you were walking your dog, and it just seems, in a sense, it seems like forever ago, doesn't it? Those first few months of, when our world changed.
It certainly does. The last 3 years seems like this strange time warp where it's hard to sort of remember when specific things happened during this period. But your restaurant, is 10 years coming in this May. How long does that feel to you, given that sort of time blip with COVID?
Look, it's a funny anniversary, and it's not something, I'm not really big on the sort of celebratory things, but the date actually coincides with me starting my first sort of proper restaurant, I suppose I'd call it, back in 2005 at Annie Smithers Bistro in Kyneton. So it's 18 years of sort of, just being a small town self-funded restaurateur. And so I felt that sort of 10 years at Fermier that included 3 years of COVID, or, the last 3 years being, the COVID and the past COVID time, deserved a little celebration, because it is, post the dramatic side of COVID, restaurants have moved from COVID straight into cost of living crises. And, cost of living for a small restaurant like mine is very much like running a big family. So it's another thing to grapple with. So the 10 years sometimes it feels like, gee, that went fast. And then other times it just feels like it's been an eternity. And now that we're sort of 21st century people, I think the concept of retiring when you're 60 or 65 has gone out the window, and we all sort of have this sort of nasty realisation that we're going to work until we're, work forever.
It certainly feels that way. The 18 years is pretty extraordinary, as you detailed just then. Take us back to sort of the Annie Smithers then to the Annie Smithers now. How different are you to back then?
Well, I was under 40. that seems like an eternity ago that there was a 3 in front of my age. My lovely wife would say that I still behave like an 8-year-old, so that's a contentious thing. But look, I think the Annie Smithers 18 years ago was brash and raw and immature, and it had a dream, and that dream was fashioned and focused around some of mainly women, the extraordinary women that I'd worked with over the early days, and they include Stephanie Alexander and Ella Wolf-Tasker, and their capacity to throw everything at a dream. And that was sort of also another woman that was very big in my life was a woman called Carol White, and she runs a property called Lavangela on the outskirts of the Daylesford Hepburn region. And I've spent 5 years working at Carol's place, once a couple of years running my own little cafe, and then being an employee. And though that time on the farm has certainly obviously had a huge impact on how I like to run things, but all 3 women had such extraordinary capacity to dream and realise those dreams. And even though I was pretty green and pretty immature and, completely unfunded, and I just went for it. I found an opportunity came my way, and I went in there feet first and off I went. And, it's been an extraordinary ride. And, 18 years later, there's that, the fully formed little restaurant that the Fermier has become, which it was never meant to become. It was always set up just to be a cafe. So restaurants have this, they have a beautiful capacity to become almost what they want to become and what the patrons want them to become, because they're living, breathing entities. It's like working with yeast. You can kill it pretty easily, but if you let it grow and you look after it, it sort of forms into its own crazy little individual personality.
Do you have any favourite stories of getting de Fermier up and running once you'd found the location?
I actually had found the location a couple of years before I arrived here, and it belonged to a dear friend of mine who it was known as Cool Country Tavern, and it was colloquially known as Gav's Tav, and it was pretty feral. It had been a restaurant. It had been turned into a restaurant by a lovely lesbian couple in the 80s. It had a lovely history where in the 90s it was a Thai restaurant, and they fitted it out with pink velvet booth seating and pink carpet. And over its time, it had ended up as Gav's Tav, and there's still a wiring in the ceiling from some sort of illegal feed to the racing channel. So I suspect that all sorts of nasty things happened here. But it was the most, it was feral. It had to be stripped of everything because everything was stained with cigarettes and alcohol. There was a deep fryer that was on some wonky table in the corner of the kitchen that had so much solid deep frying fat. It was sort of glued to the table. It was a classic sort of just gut it and start again. So it was pretty feral when I took it over. And we stripped it back. And as I said, I've always been sort of reasonably underfunded. So it's not, there's a sense in that I'm so grateful for, because when you have nothing to lose. So when you take money from somebody else as a backer or whatever, is you're always aware of the fact that you're spending somebody else's money and you have to do good by it, unless you're completely scurrilous, I suppose. But it is that thing of sort of you take chances and risks because you've got nothing. You've got nothing to lose, so you might as well have a go. And so we did that, and we opened it up as breakfast, lunch and dinner and cake and coffee and all sorts of things. I'd left the other, I'd paid off all my staff, I'd paid off all my suppliers, but I still had a nasty tax bill when I left the bistro. And that sort of, has made me much more prudent and circumspect in the operation of the second restaurant. So having not failed but struggled to grasp the entirety of running a restaurant the first time round gave me a great schooling in how not to get into that hole again.
How does it make you feel when you get that opportunity to kind of build your dream restaurant? Granted that there's limited funds, but you were really had the ability to create what you wanted to create there. I'm
incredibly grateful to all the opportunities that have come my way. So the sense that sort of the first restaurant, I happened across the owner of the building at a farmer's market when I was selling jam, and she and her husband gave me a go. And in the same way, when Cynthia approached me about tenanting this building, we negotiated on it, and that was fine. And she did everything that she could to get me in there because she thought I might be quite good for our little country town here. And, she made, even to the point that sort of 3 years later we struck a deal and they sold me the building at a very, an incredibly fair price. So it sort of has set me up for the rest of my life. So it is it's an incredible sense of that gratitude of people's kindness and the ability to work hard and see a dream and work towards it is even in this tangled, tricky world that we live in, it's always beautiful to still be able to dream and see what you can turn something into. So it makes me feel very warm and sort of all nice inside.
You mentioned that originally the plan was for it to be a cafe. Tell us about that transition that you made into sort of restaurant and farm.
The idea of it being a cafe was that I think after 8 years at the bistro, I was pretty burnt out. I was sort of struggling with the whole, construct of, where restaurants were going, what we were doing, and it just seemed easier to just run a cafe. And I've always thought of cafes and restaurants as, I have this funny analogy about, car racing. And a cafe for me seems to be rally racing. You go. Whereas restaurants are like Formula One. You spend all that time preparing and then you put your foot flat down to the accelerator and you go round as fast as you possibly can and as well as you possibly can for 2 or 3 hours, and then it's done, and then you do all the prep again and start again. So I think I was looking for a different pace, but also have a rest from restaurant land. But we found that people gravitated towards, I'd put on a bit of, I'd put on some coffee duck, or I'd put on something a bit fancier than a toasted sandwich or an omelette or whatever. And people gravitated towards that. And then I'd put on a little set menu for the day, and, more and more people had that. And the nighttime was just on a set menu, cooking from the garden. So, eventually it evolved into, we got to the point where, 1 or 2 people would order off the a la carte menu over a weekend. So it just made sense to change it up and do what the people wanted. So then it became sort of a restaurant, the set menu du jour style restaurant that I'd long had a dream for, but never quite the internal security to say, this is what you're eating. It always frightened me to make choices for people.
Well, how did you get over that hurdle?
I think that, well, the numbers were sort of on the board because they just said, we'll have the set menu. So when it got to the point that you were prepping, X number of portions of a little, 3x3 or 4x4x4 menu, and you were giving it to your staff at the end of the week because nobody ordered it from it, it just was business sense to do it. And that's created this beautiful no-waste business model that we have today.
Was there challenges with that model in a regional setting and sort of reliant on travellers from the city? What were the challenges? No challenges. The Australian public is very well travelled. Slightly less travelled now, but they are well travelled. And I think that the initial thoughts that went behind this was based on the beautiful little restaurants, either the little restaurants or the workers' cafes of regional France. And that you go in, this is what you eat, whether it's the workers' cafe at 22 euros or a little, just sub-star restaurant that's, 55 euros or whatever, is, this is what we're good at, this is what's fresh, this is what you eat. So for a long time, I felt that Australians wouldn't want to do it in their own backyard. But once I started doing it, they seemed pretty keen on the idea. And so 8 years ago, that was a bit of an outlier thing, whereas now we see restaurant after restaurant after restaurant, particularly regional restaurants, who are adopting this model because in the modern age, it makes such good financial sense. You're a real champion of local produce. Tell us a little about the connections that you've made with producers of the region.
They're priceless. They really are. We're running a series of classes as part of our 10th anniversary celebrations, and there's 4 classes, and they're called Meet the Farmer. And so I've colluded with 4 of my main protein suppliers. So I have the beautiful Jodie Clark from Great Ocean Ducks. I've got Xavier Prime from Chooks at the Rook, who does eggs and roosters. I've got Nat from Brooklands Free Range Farm, who does British White cattle and Berkshire pigs. And I've got my mate Bruce, who's my neighbour, he runs a stud called Oberon Stud, and he provides me with Suffolk lamb. So they're the prime suppliers of my proteins. Now, they all, except for, so Xavier's sort of further down towards Colac, and obviously Jodie's down at Port Campbell, down on the Great Ocean Road. So they're a bit further afield, but all of them practice extraordinary regenerative farming techniques and animal husbandry. And this is something that I'm becoming increasingly passionate about. Obviously I dig up the earth constantly to grow fruit and vegetables, and we do it in a more and more careful way as the years go by. And these farmers all align with our ethics. And one of the things I'm so excited about these classes is I'm dragging them all in so that people are often quite disconnected to how their food is grown, and the good and the bad. And it's not that we want to stand there and, on soapboxes and brandish our fists and say, no, you can't eat this and you can't eat that. But so that people have an understanding of how the food chain works and how farming works, and how some farmers are, really doing it differently to provide a future for, our kids and our kids' kids, so that we start to sort of roll the wheel around into a positive again and sort of address some of the mistakes that have been made sort of pretty much post-Second World War in how we produce food. So those relationships for me are incredibly important. They focus very much on the the regenerative and ethical guidelines that all of these producers follow. And, in being married to a vegan, it's important. But also, I tend animals every day of my life. And I understand that you can't keep all the boys. And I understand that, they do need to be, sent off and we eat them and all of those things. But by going from the live, the cows in the paddock to, beef at the restaurant, it's never lost on me that that's a life. And that's why I choose those suppliers so incredibly carefully.
Well, you've also got your own farm, Babington Park. Tell us a bit about that and the hurdles that you faced and the successes that you faced doing that.
Oh, good old Babby P. She's 6 years old now in our life.
Wow.
When I talk about Babington Park at the moment, I often will say that if you ask me what's been harder, COVID or La Nina, I will automatically say La Nina now. La Nina was way harder than COVID. Yeah. And again, it's this beautiful relation. When you actually grow things and you are, your fruit and veggies are not just arriving at your back door in polystyrene boxes. When you're connected to the earth in a different way, is you notice all of these things. So 3 years of La Nina have meant that, it's been really tough growing conditions. And that, on a broader scale, that means that for some farmers, it means an absolute boom time. And we know that with the grain harvests and things from this year. But for smaller scale farmers or farmers that, the whole eastern seaboard, has been disrupted by extraordinary weather. And it has meant that the supply of everything basic from lettuces to tomatoes to garlic to, the brassica family, all of those things have been disrupted in a major way over the last 3 years. And it just brings you back to your responsibility as an individual to do your best, because otherwise there's not going to be, we'll all be eating things that are made in laboratories, and that the people who eat fresh food are sort of going to be outliers in 30, 40, 50 years' time.
That's a concerning thought. Tell us what you're doing. What animals are you growing, and what sort of vegetables do you have in the garden?
We grow no animals for slaughter. So all of our animals are based on sort of rare breed stuff. So we've got little miniature white Galloways as the cattle, and they are used for pasture improvement and eating grass, so I don't have to mow so much. And we have a selection of smaller creatures. So we've got goats for their fleece, so we've got cashmere goats, and we've got 3 little rare breed miniature Cheviot sheep. And we have geese and ducks and chickens. And why we keep them is that, except for the cows who would like to be stabled in winter, but they're not because they make too much mess, is we actually use all of that bedding, which is primarily hay cut from our paddocks, to go into our compost. So we run a very circular thing where the grazing animals keep the grass down, they create soiled bedding, the bedding goes into the compost gets laid with all the green waste, and that goes back onto the garden so that we don't have to dig and plough and release carbon. So that's why we keep the animals. And then in the vegetable garden, we grow all our needs for the restaurant. The only thing we don't grow is our citrus, but we're working on that with our polytunnel. And I don't grow celery. And I've got a lovely man who is a friend who breeds onions. His job is an onion breeder. And Ross leaves me bags of onions on the veranda, so I don't grow onions either because Ross breeds onions. Imagine that as a job.
Yes.
So we grow everything that we use here, except for onions and celery and citrus.
As we're sort of leading up to the 10-year celebration for de Fermier, what are you most proud of?
Oh, survival's got to be pretty high up there. To still be open and operating. I think that is something for me personally to be very proud of. But that wouldn't happen without the extraordinary support I have from my lovely wife Susan, but the people that have worked with me over that 10 years. Because this restaurant isn't just about the fact that I stand out there and cook lunch for everybody. It's the service and the quality of service that the wonderful front of house people that have been with me over the years and the dishwashers, bring their personalities, their style, their skills to the place, and they've all been different. And the people who have gardened with me, so it is, I'm incredibly proud of attracting such wonderful people to come and spend either a short amount of time in my world or a long amount of time in my world. And I think they are, they're amazing. And I'm incredibly proud of what they've done.
How has the restaurant changed your life?
Well, I have to get up every day and go to work, but that's never changed. I think sort of perhaps go back to sort of the COVID years, and when we went through the COVID, so before we hit COVID, the restaurant was functioning at its optimum level, and it was a very, very happy business model that was working very nicely. Now, obviously, COVID has thrown a spanner in that. But one of the things that came out of COVID was that we had all those density limitations. Remember those? And we had, over the 2 years, we had things like we could do 10 people or we could do 15 people. But the general rule of thumb was that we could do 24 people for our square meterage when it was 1 for 2 or whatever it was. We were also closed for extended periods of time. So what happened over those 2 years was that I decided that we would just sit 24 people. That's what the future held for me. I didn't know how long the restrictions would be applied for. And then when we were doing nothing, I did a bit of renovation in the restaurant. I spent money I wasn't earning, which is always a lovely restaurateur's trick. And we did a bit of remodelling of the restaurant. So, in fact, when we came out of seating density requirements, we could still only fit 24. So what the restaurant has exhibited now for me and what it's done for me in my life is that in the 10 years that I've been here, I have been able, through sheer circumstances not pre-thought, so it hasn't been planned or mapped out, but not only have I had the opportunity to buy the building, which is, I have a mortgage, but it's a very different sense than being a tenant, signing a lease every 3 or 5 years. But I've sculpted the restaurant so that it exists, and it exists in parallel with my ageing person. Because as a 56-year-old, I can't cook for as many as I could 10 years ago. I can't do those hours. I can't stand there for that long. I can't lift the same amount of weight. So I feel that there's an incredible privilege that I have of having this funny little restaurant in the middle of a little town in central Victoria that diminishes as my capacities diminish. And we have a joke here that we'll end up just doing Sunday lunch. But, and they'll wheel me out at 75, But it is, so for me, it's given me absolute security and the capacity to dance to the beat of my own drum. And what cook doesn't dream of that thing? For some it's empire building and multiple venues. For me, I just want to turn up and cook the beautiful things from my garden and come out and say hello to all the customers and thank them for dining with us and go home at the end of a a reasonable daytime day and go and weed or mow or watch telly like a normal person.
You mentioned the Meet the Farmer master classes. What are some of the other celebrations that you have on that celebrate the decade?
Mother's Day, I've invited my kitchen mother to come. So I've asked her to write a menu for me to cook. So the very lovely Mrs. Alexander and her family are coming to join us on this day. She's written a menu. She's changed it a couple of times. I think the last email was signed off with, "I'll stop now." So that's incredibly special for me because Stephanie has been my mentor, my friend, my guiding light, I can throw anything at her about the horrors of running a restaurant and, she'll usually have some very straightforward sage advice. So that's pretty exciting. Another one that is incredibly exciting on a personal level for me is we have a very lovely winemaker in our region called Michael Dillon. And Michael runs Bindi Wines. And Michael and I have known each other for 30-odd years. And both of us were very close to our fathers. And my father died about a year before Michael's father died. And he has done something much more constructive than just remember and have a chat to Dad every so often. He's actually planted a vineyard for his dad. And he planted it after his dad died. And he has made wine from the vines since 2017, but none of them have been released. So he is releasing 5 consecutive vintages of what will be known as Darshan, his Darshan Pinot. And I get to cook a dinner for his mailing list and a lunch for mine, where we show not only the 5 Darshan wines, but some of his Chardonnays and some of his sparkling and some of his kooky. I think he's got a kooky sweet wine that I think is just for family and friends. But it's one of those celebratory things that I think in the modern age, it's not something that happens very often, that someone releases 5 consecutive vintages. And Michael is the most beautiful storyteller. He is. He has a way he writes beautifully, he speaks quietly and eloquently, and he can spin a yarn. And I am just so thrilled that we're doing that. So that's exciting. And I've also asked a couple of the girls that I've worked with over the years to come and cook with me on a couple of Monday lunches. So one will be cooking Italian and the other will be cooking Greek because I made my Greek mate Angela cook French food all these years. So it's sort of like it's their turn to shine.
Well, it's amazing that you're celebrating 10 years this May with all those events. What have you got planned for the next 10 years?
Well, 10 years. Now, 10 years takes me to, what does that take me to? 66. I'd like to still be cooking. I think that what we have here is something incredibly beautiful. It's an old-fashioned style of dining that seems to be, becoming more fashionable. It's having this sort of dining is having a bit of time in the sun. I know that it will probably go out of fashion, again. But shared, the French farmhouse style food that is shared and not intricately plated, has a sense of generosity and warmth to it, it's sort of, my job is to make people feel loved when they come into the restaurant. And I would like to keep doing that because, I've got a garden there. I might as well keep using it. I've got a little shop here. So why throw I could reinvent it as something, but that'd take a lot of effort, wouldn't it?
Well, I think a lot of people would be very pleased to hear that, and it's an absolute honour, as always, to have you on Deep in the Weeds. Congratulations on 10 years.
And what What an extraordinary achievement you guys have done. Look at the family of podcasts you've got that came out of such, I don't know, such a wrinkle in the universe. And here you are with your it's like a fleet of fast cars, isn't it? You've got a fleet.
We have a fleet of organic cars.
So congratulations, because you have provided the most wonderful insight, not only into our lives, but the way that the whole industry works and across the platform that you've developed. So many interested people, people are now interested in the stories. It's not just turning up into a restaurant and being wowed. It's about the backstory. And you guys have just perfected the art of that. So congratulations to all of you.
Well, it's thanks to amazing people like yourself with the willingness to share. And it's been quite a journey, and look forward to catching up with you soon.
I'll still be here in 10 years' time, Huck, poking around with my dirty leaks.
Amazing.
Thank you so much.
This is the Deep in the Weeds podcast. I'm Anthony Huckstep. Stay tuned as we take a deep dive into the lives of the incredible people who ply their trade in the food and hospitality sector. Special thanks to executive producer Rob Locke for making this all happen. Follow us on Instagram at Deep in the Weeds Podcast, or email us at podcast@deepintheweeds.com.au. Stay safe and be well.